Welcome to Dead Boy Detectives, the weirdest YA love triangle show you'll ever watch. We got cat kings, we got crows that turn into boys, and yet I mean all of this in the best way possible. Hello everyone, welcome back. I am here to talk to you about Dead Boy Detectives. I did a video on this where I talked about Dead Boy Detectives being canceled, so we're not getting a season 2. And when I heard that news, I was honestly a little bit shocked. I understood, I think, why that happened, and I go into it more in that video, so I'll put a link somewhere up here for you to check it out. And I'll also maybe put a link to it in the video description and the pinned comment if you guys want to check that one out if you missed it. But a lot of people love this show, myself included. And when I did that video, I asked people if they wanted to hear my full season review, as I did watch all of the show as soon as it came out, and I was intending to do this earlier, but I just got distracted with other things, and then I never really got around to it. But I am glad to say that I'm here now and I'm ready to discuss. I ended up going back through season 1 and reviewing it a little bit. So this is my full season review. I have so many notes. I made 4 pages of notes. So much to say about this show, even more than I thought. So let's get into it. So what is Dead Boy Detectives? Dead Boy Detectives is a show about 2 dead boys who are detectives for all intents and purposes. Their names are Charles Rowland and Edwin Payne, and they basically died, formed this kind of unlikely but intense friendship, and they've decided to forego going to the afterlife and crossing over, and instead decide to roam the earth together in the comics. And ultimately, they end up also becoming detectives together. And they basically go around solving cases of ghosts who have unresolved stuff and therefore cannot cross over. They help them resolve their stuff, their trauma, their emotional baggage, and discover what happened to them, how they died, and then they're able to cross over. That's what we see in the show. And each episode is a different case that they take on. A very fun format, and also a format that I think works really well here. It's like a supernatural detective show. I have said before, and I will say it again, that it reminds me a lot of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, if you've seen that show. That is based on I believe a short novel by Douglas Adams, whereas Dead Boy Detectives is based on these characters that we have from DC Comics. The characters made their first appearance in Sandman, but they made their first live-action appearance in the Doom Patrol show. And a lot of people had issues when Dead Boy Detectives was announced because these are different actors playing the characters from those who played them in Doom Patrol. And I'm going to talk about how this show kind of came to be and why these things happened a little bit later on when we talk about characters and actors. But to start off, let's start with where the show starts. I'm going to start by talking about the pacing in the show, which I actually think is pretty perfect from the beginning. I would say it starts off perfectly. We are right in medias res, right in the action, and we don't really get a formal introduction to our main characters, to Edwin and Charles. Instead, we just get to see them in action, and through the way that they interact with each other and finish up solving this case that they're on at the beginning of the show, we get to know them a little bit more. And I like that for the most part, you get a sense of who they are, but you don't get all the ins and outs of their story. And for a lot of these characters, their backstories eventually play out throughout the show. We get to know more about them, and then they open up and they tell other characters more about their backstory, and that's how we find out more about them. So it feels very organic. It doesn't feel like, oh, I have to listen to this origin story, and I like that. I think it's well done. I would say overall, the other thing that's really cool about the show is that it is 8 episodes. It's one of those shows. It's one of those, yes, the season's gonna have 8 episodes. Every show now is about 40 minutes to an hour in length and has 8 episodes for some reason. This is the format we have chosen. But this show actually fits it really well. I feel like the 8 episodes are perfect for the amount of story that we're telling here, and everything unfolds in a way that feels organic. It doesn't feel like anything is stretched or overstays its welcome. Each episode really is perfectly bundled up, and together the full season tells a whole story. So the other thing I'll say is that if you're wondering, should I even watch this show when there's not going to be a future for it necessarily at this point in time, I would say yes, because it is a complete story. It does set a few things up for a potential season 2, but it does finish each character's story in the show. So you will feel satisfied just watching season 1. However, if you like it as much as I did, and as much as many people out there did, you might be kind of sad there isn't a season 2. But like I said, it's still worth a watch because it's just a fun show. So we're going to get into some things now that are more spoilery. So I'm just going to say spoilers ahead. And if you are afraid of that, go no further than this. And if you are not, let us discuss all the ins and outs of this series. I love as well, when it comes to the pacing for this show, that we held off with Charles and Edwin's backstory until basically the penultimate episode. The second last episode, episode 7, is where we get to see how that played out, how they became friends. And I really feel that learning people's backstories as we go through, it just gives us more emotional buy-in. So by the time we hear their origin, we're really invested in these characters. And it makes it much more of an emotional ride because we know how much this moment means to them. So we go into it with a lot of emotional backing, I guess, that's been built throughout the rest of the season. I thought it was a great way to kind of begin to wrap season 1, learning that story of how they first met. And it's just an emotional roller coaster, man. This entire show is an emotional roller coaster. A lot of that has to do with the themes in the show. And a few of my favorite themes that this touches on are abuse in relationships and the queer elements of the show. It is a very queer show. There are a lot of queer characters, and it also has a lot of things to say about, I think, identity as well, and embracing who you are and not running from who you are, and also accepting that we are people and we are flawed and we also all change over time. When it comes to the abuse, I find that it's very closely tied in through Crystal's character. So Crystal's character is attached to a demon. Her ex is a demon, and early on in the series, Crystal Palace, that's her name. Her name is Crystal Palace. She ends up getting saved by Edwin and Charles. They basically remove the demon from her, and then she does not have her memories anymore. The demon took that with him, and she is now trying to process, 1, the trauma she just went through and all of that, but 2, also trying to get her memories back from her demonic, literally demonic X. And I love how the possession is used as a sort of stand-in, but also a literal manifestation of abuse, because to completely lose yourself to somebody else is possession, and that is, I feel like, what it feels like to be in an abusive relationship. And I say this as someone who has been in abusive situations, who has experienced abuse in relationships. And I will say that it feels like what I see with Crystal in the show. It's just, you have zero agency. And when she's possessed, she has literally zero agency. So this part of the story of Dead Boy Detectives really connected to me, and I really connected a lot with Crystal in the show. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The other thing is the queer themes in this show, which are quite good. I would say that this is pretty unparalleled for me as a show, a queer, like, YA show. Like, I just haven't seen a lot of live action shows that are like this, that go to this level, especially in the fact of it being also comic book, also supernatural. So there's a lot of elements in here that I really love tied in with that. So that was really great. It actually reminds me of another YA sort of young adult movie that I saw that is called Love, Simon, and I love that movie. It is a great sort of queer coming out movie that tackles a lot of the ideas of what it's like to explore your identity and come out as queer, and a lot of the struggles that you face with that in a great, approachable, grounded, fun way. And this show is similar, I would say, in the way that it approaches that. There is a really good moment in episode 7 that I feel like perfectly embodies this, and it's when Charles is back in hell and he confronts his old schoolmate, who is the one that got him trapped in hell because he did a ritual and then Charles gets pulled away and then he has to escape. He's confronting him and he's basically forgiving him for what happened, because once he realizes that it was because his schoolmate liked him and had a crush on him and thought that Edwin was like him, but then Edwin didn't want to open up because he couldn't accept himself. His schoolmate says to him, as he considers going back to his torture in hell, as he's momentarily taken away from it for this conversation, he says, "Do you think it has to be torture, being the way we are?" And I just felt like, wow, that is heavy, but that really sums up what it can feel like to be other queer in the world, and I think that this show really understands that. And you can also apply these themes to other things too. The queerness can also just be a stand-in as well for just anything that you feel is different about you that people can't accept you for, or that you struggle to accept yourself for, right? So that's the other thing. It is kind of a universal theme, I think, as well, in that way. And I love this idea of hell, and that kind of comes from the Sandman universe as well, just this idea of hell being a place that, like, Lucifer doesn't even want to torment people in hell, doesn't even really want to be in hell, was just made to go there by God, fell from heaven after rebelling, is forced to be there, and all the people that come in basically want to be tormented, and they think that this is being done to them, but at the same time, hell is like what you make it. Like, you put yourself in hell because it's your inability to accept your own choices, your own regret, your own guilt that puts you in that place. So it's almost like people are kind of choosing to torment themselves as opposed to leaving hell, which in the comics, at least in the Sandman comic, the original one, that's kind of the implication. It feels like a lot of the humans that are tormented there could leave almost at any time, but they choose to stay because they need to be tortured, is what they think, subconsciously or consciously. I also love Charles's complete acceptance of Edwin when Edwin confesses his feelings eventually for Charles, when Charles comes to rescue him from hell. I think the thing that I really liked about this is it kind of gave us like the happiest ending I think you could have. This idea of being in love with your friend, and you know, you want to tell them and you're struggling to accept yourself and just even admit that you are, you know, gay, and then you say this and there's all this on the line because obviously you love this person on so many levels, but you're also in love with them. And Charles's response is basically just that, like, no matter what, you're always going to be my best friend. This will never change. You're always going to be my best mate, and we have forever to figure out this. And I can't say that I'm in love with you, but I definitely love you and value you above anyone else, and there's no one else I'd go to hell and rescue. And it just felt like such a nice happy ending where it's not necessarily about the acceptance of those feelings and reflecting them back. It's more just like an acceptance of who Edwin is, and Charles completely accepts his best friend. And I just thought that was so beautiful to see. It really like moved me when I watched it for the first time. I was a wreck watching that, honestly. So speaking of Charles and Edwin, what's going on with these characters, and why aren't they the same ones as Doom Patrol? Huh? What's up with that? Well, there's actually a whole reason for that, and that actually has to do with the fact that Dead Boy Detectives was originally going to be an HBO show. It was going to be a spin-off out of Doom Patrol. Just like how Doom Patrol was actually a spin-off out of Titans, Dead Boy Detectives was going to be the spin-off show. But they didn't want to do it until 2025, so it wouldn't have come out till next year, at the time of this recording anyways. And the reaction that they got, well, I mean, Neil Gaiman apparently was like, this is ridiculous, didn't like that idea, and so they ended up shopping around the idea of this show, and Netflix wanted it, and they had Sandman, and so Neil Gaiman, there was an article that I read where he talked about it was kind of weird because initially when it was going to be with HBO Max, they had to like file off like all the Sandman details, even though Dead Boy Detectives are more connected to Sandman in the comics than they've ever been to Doom Patrol. And yet then when he went to Netflix, they wanted the opposite thing. They wanted to make it part of the Sandman universe, and then they were more playing with the connections to Sandman and like weaving those in, which is also just strange and interesting. But that's also why the characters were recast, because it ended up being removed from one universe and kind of put into a different universe, if that makes sense. So it wasn't because they didn't like the actors. It wasn't anything necessarily malicious. It's just now it's with a different studio that's doing it. It was with Netflix instead of HBO, and so it changed. Anyways, I also just thought that was interesting, so I thought I'd share it with you. And I know a lot of people have been talking about this online, and I just wanted to answer that question for anyone that was curious about it, that saw them in Doom Patrol. I haven't seen that season of Doom Patrol yet, but I have watched quite a bit of Doom Patrol, and I did like it. I do need to go back and finish that show because I really loved Doom Patrol. So I also feel like there are people that are at odds with each other, like the Sandman people versus the Doom Patrol people. And I just want to say we can all be friends. Both of these shows are good shows. Doom Patrol is great. Sandman is great. It's all good. I like both. So I'm not trying to say this is better than that. I think they're both great. They just do different things, and they're with different streaming services. I also will say that there's many characters in this show that I like, but I do feel that there are some that I wish we saw more of, like Death, who was hinted at being in this show, but is really only in it like a very tiny bit. Like they did connect it to Sandman, but it's very loosely connected. Also, speaking of that, huge marketing mishaps I feel like in this show, because I feel like so many people that love Sandman did not know that this show was connected to it, did not know this was connected, and that that it was like a Sandman universe we're trying to build here, like how we have in the comics. And I think that's disappointing because we missed out on people that could have been watching the show from the beginning that are only now finding out that this was connected. And I know that's the case as well because I saw some of you lovely folks in my comments, which I have to go in to my first video and respond to a lot of those comments because wow, there's so many amazing comments. And thank you if you commented. Know that I do read them. I don't always get to respond right away, but I do read them and I do want to get back and respond to some of you because they're just beautiful. There's beautiful comments. I know some of you said that you didn't know it was connected to Sandman. So there you go. But anyways, Death is in here, who is also coming over from the Sandman series, played by Kirby Howell-Baptiste again, and she is fantastic in it, and I love her in Sandman, and I just wanted more of her. However, there are a lot of characters we get a lot of, like Crystal, which some people found to be annoying, but I think because of my experience with abuse and that connection that I have with Crystal, I didn't really find her annoying, and I actually really like her character and like the characterization, because it did feel accurate to me. I know that sometimes when you're in those relationships, it can cause you to behave in ways that are grating or annoying. You know, the idea of her keeping secrets from the boys, in some cases, telling lies, lashing out, being difficult. That can be what it's like when you are coming out of something like that, because honestly, you feel this sense of a loss of self that you then have to rebuild, and it can be really frustrating. And so I think even though her character makes some frustrating choices and she can also be quite impulsive, and just that was something that I connected with because I saw the broken pieces of myself in Crystal, who's just trying to figure it all out and put herself back together again. Jenny is also another character that I love, who is the butcher shop owner. She is amazing, and I've loved her throughout the entire show. And one of the things I'm really sad about is that the odds of us ever seeing her again anywhere in the Sandman universe without the Dead Boy detectives seem very slim. And she was so good. Dang. She also perfectly embodies this sense of a character who is also an outcast. Like, I love how everyone that is in the main cast kind of deals with these feelings of loneliness and just wants a connection, but they're all kind of awkward and struggling to reach out to people and struggling to really find that genuine sense of connection. And so the fact that we have this outcast crew of people that come together felt very organic in the show. And Jenny is also a character that belongs in that. And I just love that each character that is, you know, kind of part of our group of, I mean, not quite officially Dead Boy detectives, but our group of friends here and acquaintances, they all have an element of loneliness to them. And they all find solace in each other and are able to work up the courage to reach out and be who they are unapologetically. And I thought that was all very beautiful. Also, Cat King is one of those people. He's also kind of lonely. He wants to be with Edwin. I feel there is a longing in him for sure. But also, he is just one of the sexiest characters in the show. I love Cat King. And I love this idea of he has all of this. He has all this power. He has all of his cats. But at the end of the day, even he is just looking for a sense of connection and belonging. Tragic Mick is also another character that has that. And I love this characterization. And I love Tragic Mick in the show. I love his little yup. I love all of the little details about this character. He's just such an interesting and curious character, and I do wish there was more of him in the show. Overall, my favorite character, though, if you were wondering, is Charles. I'm a big Charles fan. What can I say? I also love Nico. I didn't really write any notes about her, but shoutouts to Nico. Honestly, I love everyone. I guess except Edwin. Maybe it's because I'm the most like Edwin? Let's talk about how these characters connect to each other. Well, there's a lot of great relationships in here, and something that I love about this show is all the love triangles we have. There's so many love triangles. I also love how Edwin and Charles are so different and yet they're best friends, and how Death really connects them. Death connects a lot of characters in this, but also so does abuse. And one of my favorite lines, I would say, in the show comes from the episode The Case of the Two Dragons, where Crystal, after the case has been solved, says to the boys, I guess all three of us have lost our lives to boys who went too far. It's a really shitty thing to have in common. And it really does cement this idea that although they're all very different characters, through their life experiences, they do actually have a lot in common, these characters, and something that it's like, I mean, it's kind of trauma bonding, but it is. It is this sense of a very strong bond between them. Edwin lost his life to bullies at school who did a whole sacrificial ritual, and then he gets dragged off to hell. Charles Charles was bullied by his literal friends just for standing up for someone, and also was beaten by his dad. And then we also have our other good friend Crystal, who lost literally her memories to a demon who possessed her, who was also portrayed as being male, her demon boyfriend. So that's something that I thought was really touching, and it's a really emotional moment, I think, for all three of the characters, but also for you watching it to realize. All of the actors in this are amazing. I'm not going to talk about like everyone just because that's a whole other video, honestly, and I've already talked too long at this point, and I still have some more things to talk about. But I will say one of my favorite characters in terms of the acting is actually Ruth Connell as the night nurse from the Lost and Found department. Every time she shows up, it's such a delight. She's such a scene stealer, and I just love her. She just has so many great reactions, so much amazing delivery. It really is, though, in when she plays a scene with somebody, what she takes from someone and what she gives back. I can tell that she feels like she'd be a very generous scene partner, and she does a great job. I'm also sad that I probably won't see her again as a night nurse. This review is making me depressed. I love the disguises that Charles and Edwin wear and how we get these different actors that get to play these characters. That's always so fun. Like, that's one of my favorite things about the show. And also every actor that plays them as ghosts in disguise as humans is amazing. So good job to all those actors that stepped in there. Costume-wise, this is a show that really lives in the details and is also so fashionable. I think Nico has the best wardrobe if I was going to rate anyone's wardrobe here personally, but I also love Esther, and Esther has so many little details just in general as well. Also another amazing performance. I will say that there's one moment that I really love that stood out to me, and that's when they first go to Esther's place and Crystal has basically made a call to make it seem like Esther needs to go pick up a package. So she goes to her car, she gets in, she closes the door on her coat, and then she speedily drives away, like very chaotically. And just this idea of her coat just hanging out and her closing the door like she doesn't care. Every little element of what's chosen in those scenes, whether that's acting choices or directional choices or something that was written in the script, I'm not sure, but they all are such strong, small details that really make up the character of Esther. And I would say that for all the characters in this, choices are like that throughout. And it isn't just on the acting level. It feels like it extends to every element of the show in terms of how that character is portrayed. Another thing that I love about this show is the cinematography. I feel like it's ethereal, it's supernatural. There's also a sense of fun and whimsy in the way that it's shot, and it's creative. There's also a grittiness to it. It's like a grittiness meets a sense of whimsy, and it's just different. And I like that it's not boring to watch visually. I love that even like they don't just phone it in for anything when it comes to the cinematography. Even our flashbacks with Edwin, they're shot in a different format. If you notice, the screen shrinks and then it widens when we leave the flashback. The way that perspective is used in this, like when Monty is being transformed from a crow into a boy and we see from sort of his perspective looking up at Esther as she's working on Monty. This also extends to editing. I mean, with the transitions as well as filters that are used in this, the effects that they use, like when they go to see the washerwoman, it really feels like you're being transported to different places, and it really helps to create an emotional connection, I feel, to the characters and the scenes as well. And this also is reflected in the art direction in the show, the sets, the details on the sets, the animated flashback that we get later in the season to Esther's backstory when the Cat King is telling the story of Esther. There's so much strong imagery as well that's used in this show. You can tell everyone that worked on the show, I feel like, was having a good time, I think, was having a blast. There's a lot of love in the details here. The props, the set decoration, I never get to talk about props in shows because props don't usually get to stand out to me. But the great thing about Dead Boy Detectives is the props department gets to have so much fun putting together all these fun things that the Dead Boy Detectives use, because we get a lot of items that they pull out of Charles's backpack, which is like endless. And you get things like the lexicographical lenses, which are in episode 2, The Case of the Dandelion Shrine. So there's just tons of fun things for them to build, and they are well built. There's so many little details to them, and everything feels very specific. Even in the Dead Boy Detectives agency, when they're back in England, I noticed there's board games on the shelves and their whole like case board, just every element of it feels so thought out, so polished, and it really makes it feel like these spaces that we see are lived in or are on another plane of existence. Once again, this is not a show that gives up at any point on anything. The sound is amazing. We get great sound effects, we get great music. I would never skip the intro because I love the animation, and I honestly love the theme music for the show. At one point, when the dandelion sprites are possessing Nico, we can actually hear them giggling when she faints. And you don't realize that it's them giggling until after you know what they sound like. But when I went back to watch it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's literally the actors giggling who play the dandelion sprites. Also, I love the dandelion sprites. Also, the washerwoman's voice when they visit her and when she answers the questions, how there's different parts of her speech that are highlighted as the main part and there's echoes around her, or it might start strong and then echo out, or it might echo first and then finish strong, as though we're talking about how her answers are coming from different times, since she is someone that exists in the sense of the past, the present, and the future, washing up all the blood of humanity throughout all of time and space, basically. The special effects are probably one of the weakest parts of the show, in my opinion, but I do feel that there is quite a bit of practical stuff that happens in this, and that's when it's the strongest, but it's not bad for a Netflix series, I'd say. I've seen worse. I've seen better, I've seen worse. The story is also really good. It's a story that I feel like I would want to write. It actually reminds me of some sort of nonsensical stories that I started writing years ago now and that I've never finished. There was this specific novel I was working on about these kids that are at a house for the summer, and the house is weird and it has all these weird rooms and all these secrets. It also kind of reminds me of Umbrella Academy, like when it started and it was weird and delightful and interesting, and the weirdness wasn't bad, like season 4, unfortunately. But also, you know, Umbrella Academy, but make it YA. The only thing that I really don't like about this show is that it does feel very YA, but I do think it's one of the most well-rounded YA shows that I've watched, and I do think there is a lot of adult appeal in the show, so I don't think you have to be a young adult to enjoy this show. However, I will say that's definitely the main demographic here, and if you are part of that demographic, you're probably really gonna like this show. And for me, it was a little bit off-putting because sometimes it felt a little like, oh boy, here we go. But that's just because, you know, I've lived the young adult part of my life, I guess. And yeah, and there are some things that are a little bit harder for me to connect with at times because of that, because I am at a different stage, I guess, in life, I feel. I'm still young and I'm still an adult, and yet just all elements of the script as well are specific, I feel. Like, even in the transformation with Monty, and I mean, granted, I don't know if that's directly from the script or if that's storyboards, but the details in that transformation and all of the specific things that are happening in that scene are really well done, and it's really creepy. There's also some unexpected twists, and I love that all of the unexpected twists that I sort of wrote down as examples are all foreshadowed, and yet I still didn't think that that would be how it played out, even though they were foreshadowed. Like Jenny's romantic interest literally being a psychotic serial killer. She says, you know, these letters are weird and they're basically serial killery, like being typed out, and it's creepy. So that's foreshadowed. And yet when that happened, I was not expecting us to go there. And like Nico's death, which even though it's foreshadowed throughout the show, it happened so quickly, I wasn't expecting it. I will say though, I feel like the flashback montage we get of all the moments when she's like, oh yeah, like my death is being foreshadowed, I think that would have been an emotionally stronger moment if we hadn't cut away. I wish we had just stayed in that moment, because we know it's been foreshadowed. You don't need to remind me. I remembered. I just didn't think it would actually happen. And then when it happened and they were like, that's that, I was like, that's that. Oh no. My favorite episodes in the show are probably The Case of the Devlin House, which is so brutal. It's also very Charles focused, I feel. And I love Charles, and I thought it was a good mystery. And I also feel like The Case of the Two Dead Dragons, which is another great mystery. And I like how it plays with stereotypes. I love how it kind of initially tries to subvert the stereotype of like the mean jocks who bully you, but then in the end that is who those characters are. And it also deals a lot with this idea of the patriarchy and just even in sports, elements of the patriarchy that come into play, in this idea of, you know, male athletes who do well. It doesn't matter what they do to people around them. If they're a great athlete, it's like all is forgiven and you just need need to look the other way because boys will be boys. That element of boys will be boys is very much in the episode. And yet, you know, we have characters on both sides that are boys and are being jerks and that are boys and are not being jerks. So it does feel a little bit stereotypical in the ending because they did end up going that way with it, with the dead characters being the jerks who are just jocks that are jerks. But I like that it played with the idea of them not being that. And I like that, you know, Charles just wanted really to believe that they were good guys. I think that it's interesting, at least, the way that they approached that story. My leftover questions for this. Will Rochelle Okoye be reprising her role as Lilith in Sandman Season 2? Because she plays Lilith in this. We know Lilith is a character that appears in Sandman, and I'm just wondering what will be connected to Sandman. I really want to know, because will anything that was hinted at for Season 2 of Dead Boy Detectives be carried over into Sandman? Or are we going to lose all of this? I really hope not, because it was a really good show. Overall, I give this season a 4 out of 5. I really like it. I do feel like it being more of a young adult show just meant that it wasn't as much for me as I would have liked it to be, but at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's more of a personal preference. And there are the effects and some things like that that aren't as good as they could be. But the acting, the details, the set decoration, I mean, this is still one of my favorite shows of the year right now. I really, really liked it. And I'm sad that there won't be a second season at this point. But who knows? Anything could happen. Maybe it will get taken back. Maybe it will get picked back up. We'll have to wait and see. And if you want to know more about why I think it was canceled, like I said, do check out my other video. That's everything for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Season 1, how you feel about Dead Boy Detectives. I also have the Dead Boy Detectives Black Label series, which I'm going to read and do a video on. I can't wait to get into this. And if you do like Dead Boy Detectives and you want to read more about them, they first appeared in the Sandman comic, which I do really love that story. It's probably one of my favorite stories ever told in any and all formats that I've seen it in thus far. Really love the audiobook, actually. And I will also say that there is a Dead Boy Detectives Volume 1 that you could check out that is not Black Label. And I believe they also have a one-shot. So I'm probably going to go through and read a little bit more on them as well. And then if I find anything interesting to share, then I'll do that. That's it for me. I'll see you next time. And until then, friends, stay nerdy. Bye!